Anyway, John's going to read 2 passages from the book, and then we'll talk about it. And thank you all so much for being here. And there's some seats here if anyone wants them. There's one there, there's 2 there. Anyway, so...
Maybe you should turn yours off,
I
turn mine off.
I'll turn mine off before you turn yours on. Okay.
So this is the story of a New York City family, and the book opens with the return after 3 years of the son, Giorgio, from a wilderness camp that he'd been sent to by his parents. And Giorgio had been out of the city, of course, from time to time, but he'd never really lived anywhere but New York City. So it switches into the first person, and that alternates with the third person story throughout. So, but this is Giorgio introducing himself, beginning to talk about and trying to figure out what happened to him. First of all, my name isn't fucking Giorgio. When I was born, Mark was the name I was given. And that is my true original name before my mother changed it 4 years ago. I know lots of kids are given nicknames, especially girls, but I had a perfectly good name, and it is the one I wish everyone would use. When I was transferred to Camp Fremont, the guides greeted me by calling me Giorgio. Even my goons called me Giorgio. My name is Mark. I am not Italian, I said, trying not to shout at them. So I'm retracing my steps little by little. Be patient with me. This isn't easy. It forces me to review some of the terrible things I've done. I tell myself sometimes that I wasn't the one who did them. I was provoked, and the provoking was responsible for my actions. If the program did one thing, it was to make it perfectly clear that it was really me who did the things I was ashamed of. I did have the power to act in other ways, even if I didn't understand that while it was happening. But you spend a freezing night shivering under a tarp at 8,000 feet, solitary, frigid fucking confinement, pissing into a plastic bottle so you don't have to get up and out of your sleeping bag and freeze your dick off. And it gets harder and harder, week after week, to convince yourself that you aren't responsible for something. At first, I hated the noise. At first, I hated the noise of the bristlecone and pinyon pine trees creaking in the wind. It sounded to me like they were groaning, aching, and bending in ways that were painful to their old, gnarled bodies. I thought they were trying to tell me how much it hurt, and I couldn't stand the thought of their pain. But the longer I spent out there alone, the more they became my chorus when I had no other company. They talked to me and consoled me. I started to think of them as this kind of heavenly forest choir, and their straining in the wind was their daily warming up exercise. We all have our music, I guess. When there was no breeze and they were hushed, I hoped the wind would rev up and their singing would start again. During the first week or two, it was hard to get the city out of me. The hoodoos spooked me. They rose like standalone desert skyscrapers out of nowhere. During the day, they were peculiar, kind of lopsided. At night, they were terrifying, and their tilting made zombie shadows fall across the dirt. The desert varnish, a top coat of paint on the cliffs, our leader told us, gave the sandstone spooky human faces. But the worst was the stars banging away at me, competing for my attention when I was scrunched up in my sleeping bag and trying to duck their glare. It took days for me to get used to lights that bright I couldn't switch off, and the fresh air choked me. There was so much of it I almost couldn't breathe. I had to practice sleeping with my mouth closed so it wouldn't fill up with wind. Although it feels like a long time ago now, it also feels like it happened yesterday. From my sleeping bag, I could see how my behavior turned from bad to worse. The first thing I did was to smash Walt's head into the aquarium. Walt was my friend, my only friend in 8th grade. He was a pale, skinny kid who was shorter than the rest of us. His dad was sick, very sick. Cancer of the, I can't remember. He followed me around everywhere. I couldn't get rid of him, but I kind of liked him. He'd come over to my apartment after school, and we'd listen to records all afternoon. The same ones, day after day. For my 13th birthday, my dad had given me a turntable and a few vinyl records that he had saved from the olden times, from the Cat Stevens to the Talking Heads. We'd play some of them so many times, my mom would come into my room and say, "Basta." It's weird for your own mother to turn Italian and your dad to do nothing to save her. It's like living with an international transplant or spy. We listened to Tea for the Tillerman so often that we knew all the lyrics by heart. We could even hum the opening bars before Cat started shouting that there was a lot of bad everywhere. I guess Walt and I bonded over that. I wonder what he's doing now. Poor kid. I learned that his father died in a letter Mom wrote me. I should have written to tell him that I felt sorry for him, but I didn't. Not writing was just another sin. I know that's bad, but it's not as bad as what I did to him on that late fall day. So part one and one side of the story. That's the more dramatic side. And the other side of the story is a farce, and the farce and dramatic story, which occurred to me sort of at different times, and then I found myself weaving together, really is what is at the root of the book. So in this next section, Spence, Benjamin's younger brother, Benjamin is Giorgio, Mark's father, and Spence is his uncle, to his office because he has an idea that he wants to spring on him and hopes to enlist him to join him. And Spence is the CEO, founder of a company called Belphonics, which is a hearing aid company. I think that's what you need to know. So Benjamin comes in, and the first thing that Spence decides that he wants to do is examine his older brother's ears. "Ben, you have to take better care of your ears. It's a swamp in there. Ever heard of a Q-tip? But still, the mechanism is so beautiful, so perfect. The tympanum is like a shimmering cymbal. The cochlea is curled around itself, and those little hairs that trap the sound waves and dispatch signals to the brain are in perfect condition. Dr. H can give you the whole rundown, but I don't see anything wrong," Spence said, in a tone of momentary rapture, withdrawing the otoscope. Benjamin felt defenseless against his brother's diagnosis. He returned the otoscope to the medical cabinet and signaled that his brother should follow him to the office seating area, a couch, 2 chairs, and a glass-top coffee table. "So let me tell you what I have in mind," Spence said. "Ideas are dangerous, I know that, but listen to the whole thing before you tear it apart. First, how many times did you go to CBGB's?" he asked, staring straight into his brother's eyes. Benjamin hadn't thought of the dingy, raucous club on the Lower East Side that reeked of beer in decades. "A few times," Benjamin answered, struggling to remember the details of a place he hadn't been to in 30 years. The excitement of the cab rides downtown to the Bowery, the exhaustion of the return home came back immediately, as did erratic moments of ecstasy. "Maybe it was more than a few." "Not true, Benji," Spence said. "You went at least 50 times, and I went even more, since we didn't always go there together. Remember the bands we saw there for the first time? Talking Heads, Television, Ramones, Voidoid, Suicide. Remember those amazing nights? We memorized every word they sang, knew every riff. We wanted to be them. How they danced, how they flopped on the stage, how they didn't care what anybody thought of them. We were so young, nobody ever carded me. We were high, we drank, we puked in the toilets. Remember the graffiti on the walls? If those weren't the greatest nights of our lives, what were?" Spence spoke with a phlegmy, contagious excitement that made Benjamin feel as if they'd been temporarily rejoined as brothers and adventurers. There were some great moments, I agree. That was so long ago. What has it got to do with us now? Benjamin asked, growing impatient. So I don't know about you, Spence answered, but my hearing isn't that great. My theory is that it must have been the nights at CBGB's that caused the damage. Tom Verlaine's guitar, Richard Lloyd's, God, they sang and played together like angels, didn't they? Anyway, it can't just be me. There must be hundreds or thousands, maybe millions of us who lost some or all of our hearing at CBGB's or other clubs or stadiums around the world, right? Maybe, Benjamin said, or maybe they just got older like we did, and the hearing decline was organic. And you're right, Spence, ideas are dangerous, so what is it? Okay, so when CBGB went out of business in 2006, it started licensing its name. They even have a gift shop at Newark Airport. So my idea is this. What if we acquired the rights to the CBGB name to create a line of hearing aids for all of us? for all of us who were wounded by rock and roll. One of the most difficult obstacles in the hearing aid business is that people don't want to admit that they're aging and need them. They resist. Yet almost 80% of people who might benefit won't use them. It's the same as walking with a cane or having a patch over your eye. It proclaims that you're old. It also says that you're checked out, no longer a player in the external world. You're adrift on your inner sound waves since you can't hear the ones outside you. That's why they make them smaller and smaller, so no one will be able to see them. But what if we designed a hearing aid that stood out, that was a badge of honor, one that proclaimed that you were proud of your impairment, not embarrassed by it? What if by wearing them you showed the world that you had lost your hearing for something you loved, and that you knew that it had been a worthy sacrifice, a sacrifice for rock and roll? What better reason could there be than that? The theme of our lives, the heart of our youth still beating, still alive. Wouldn't that be glorious? Wouldn't that transform us from hobbling aging men into esteemed veterans, actors in a great drama? It would be a vindication of the life we lived. It would affirm our devotion to what we loved, what we followed and believed in. Wouldn't that make us greater and more beloved? Spence paused to give his brother a moment to digest what he thought of as his most original idea.
Thank you, John. So there are two distinct books going on in The Sterns Are Listening. There's did you set out to tell a dark tale, and then you turned it into something more accessible by allying it to the farce, or did you?
Well,
what story did you want to tell?
I wanted to tell both of them, but at the time I was writing this, maybe not so now, I didn't feel that I could tell a dark story without leavening it. And so the question was, how do I do that? And, how do I keep them apart? And then how do I weave them together? Because I had two, if I just elaborate,
yes.
I had two ideas for this. One, my hearing stinks. Obviously, I lost it at CBGB's because I couldn't accept any other possible explanation. And two, when we were raising our kids in Manhattan, and not many, but several of their friends one day to the next vanished, and we didn't know where they went or what happened to them or why. And I know it bothered our kids, but it bothered me, and it sat in my head. So these synchronous ideas were my assignment. How do they make sense to each other? How do I, you know, how do I bring them together in a way that isn't absurd? So you can decide whether I did that or not, but that's what I was hoping to do.
So you found out about wilderness camps because your kids' friends disappeared?
Yeah. I mean, 2 or 3, I mean, kids who played with our kids every day. I mean, who we thought of as, you know, as our kids' friends, and we felt close to, and although we didn't necessarily know the parents.
Right. But also in the book, it's Spence who turns Giorgio / Mark into a sort of violent kid, isn't it? So
Well, yes. I mean, that's how this.
That's how you fit it all together.
That's how it fits together, and you know, and Spence becomes, you know, Spence is a malevolent narcissist, and yet you don't know the extent of it. You learn it as Giorgio and Mark figure it out for himself, and so that's the, you know, unfolding.
Who was the character who was most fun to write? Was it Spence?
Well, Spence was a lot of fun, but the audiologist, Dr. H, was probably the most fun to write because she becomes mixed in with the action, but I like her because she was a sort of a woman who's a professional explainer of women to men. And that part was joyous to write.
Did anyone help you?
No.
It all came from you.
It all came to me, and I feel sorry for the actual audiologist who was the inspiration for this one.
That is one of the book really is very, very funny. She has a calendar on her wall with which heels she's going to wear on which days.
Right.
Which is
It's a prescriptive dress calendar of stilettos. And yes, so.
So in your memoir, The Skinny, which I also published, there's sort of similar themes, aren't there? Because there's also sort of, yeah.
Yes, I mean,
yeah.
I think that, you know, The Skinny, for those of you who don't know about it, is a memoir I wrote about growing up from when I was between ages 11 and 23. So it was a story of a teenage adolescent shaping. And, you know, I think that's not completely far afield from Giorgio and Mark and what happened to him. They're not the same character at all.
No, Giorgio's tall.
Giorgio is also tall, yes. But I think that in this book, just as an extension
yes.
From The Skinny, is that this book is kind of figuring out how to reform a fractured family and what it looks like to try and put a family back together that blew up. And, you know, and I try and do that, you know, with the drama of it and with the humor of it, one theme leading the other and progressing through the story. So, but I wasn't what I set out to do. I didn't think, oh, I'm going to write a story about a broken family that needs to be reassembled. That didn't, you know, that never occurred to me, and just the sound of that sounds incredibly boring. But I think in a way that was sort of behind that.
But do you think that humor and the license provided by fiction as opposed to memoir makes it easier to tell a dark tale?
I don't know if it makes it easier.
More palatable?
Maybe more palatable. I don't know. As I said, it's I want to tell jokes. I mean, I'm not a comedian or anything, but I want to tell jokes for me so I can more easily accept the difficulties of the book. And when I started to write The Skinny, I thought, well, what fun. I'm going to write the history of my weight. I mean, it's hilarious. Everybody thought it was hilarious. But then I started to write the story, and it wasn't as much as funny as I thought it was going to be. In fact, it was, really quite serious.
I never thought being slight was funny.
Well, I did. So you were ahead of me.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about music.
Okay.
Because music figures in the book, and we did go to CBGB's a lot, although you were still in college my first year here. I arrived in the summer of '75, and you picked me up at the boat, and we went to CBGB's 3 days later.
Really?
So, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. You would, yeah.
Well, my theory is I never would have gone to CBGB's if Michael hadn't dragged me there. Because I never went anywhere, but Michael always had great places to go. He knew where to go, what to do, and, I think otherwise I might have stayed behind.
Well, no, but you loved music.
I did love music. But, I think the thing about CBG, I'm writing an article about the 50th anniversary, which is next month of the club, and I think it's hard to remember now how diabolical it was. I mean, the area, just the area itself was so damaged and ruined, and the people, and growing up in the suburbs, I grew up with tales of the Lower East Side and the Bowery, and it was a fearsome place. So the club was became a little bit an extension of that.
Yeah, maybe to you, coming from Westchester, because...
Right, well, from England, probably you didn't know that much about the Bowery.
No, I knew nothing.
Oh, well, in middle school, that was just like, it was, it was a ditty. I mean, and the more, and later on, I started to read a little bit about it, and went flop houses and winos and all that stuff, and But anyway, so it was a dangerous place.
Right.
I thought of it as a dangerous place. I mean, maybe exciting, but...
Yeah. So music wasn't that central to your life?
Oh, no, it
Yeah.
really was.
I mean, we saw some amazing things together. We went to the Gaslight in '72 to see Larry Coryell, and when I read John Hammond's autobiography afterwards, I realized that it was Bruce Springsteen's audition night that we saw, and we were in the front row, and there was no one there. So
yeah, no, we
went to see Randy Newman at the bitter end.
But CBGB's, once you were inside and were over for me, once I was inside and over the hump, over the fear of it, then it was completely mesmerizing, addictive, and all that. I mean, definitely.
And do you think music is central to the book, or is music just a mechanism?
I think that...
Because they talk about music a lot.
Yeah, well, what I tried to do is I tried to make the songs part of the story, and that they, in many places, they don't dictate the mood, but they interpret the mood of what's happening with the characters at the time. And, even in that part where Cat Stevens is singing, there's a lot of bad everywhere. I mean, it's kind of a foreboding of, of what's going to happen in the story. And what Giorgio doesn't even know at that point in the book. And, and then as, go further into it, that there are many other places where that happens, that the songs become points of disagreement between characters, or, or provide other ingredients to the story.
And then the Rolling Stones are in there.
Well, the Rolling Stones are in there because, Benjamin, it's not that he doesn't like the Rolling Stones, but he doesn't like the people who do like the Rolling Stones. And so it was more that, because as you probably all remember, you used to like or dislike people who liked or disliked what you did, and it was, and that was, and so there are vestiges of that in Benjamin, and so there's a key scene that happens at the Rolling Stones' 50th anniversary concert in Brooklyn at the Barclays Center. But I'm not trying to assess the bands, but just put them in the context of the story.
And in your climactic scene, there's Marquee Moon and Waiting for the Man. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, there's Venus de Milo, which is
Venus de Milo,
which is sort of
and Waiting for the Man
of television from Marquee Moon, and that's an important scene because it becomes a scene between Benjamin and Giorgio, and it binds them together because Giorgio had never heard the song before. Benjamin was listening to it for the first time in 30 years, and realizing how good it was, even though he'd shunned it, and realizing that his son listened to it too, without acknowledging what he thought of it, but he could tell his son liked it. And part of this, when I was writing the book, is that, I asked my kids and their friends, how many Rolling Stones songs can you name? And the most I got out of any of them was 5 or 6. But when I asked them, well, did you ever listen to television? They knew Marquee Moon by heart. And it meant so much to them. So I thought, well, that was a way to bond the father and the son who'd been separated for 3 years.
Let's see if anyone has any questions now.
Yeah.
Having played at CBGB's, I agree that it was a very loud place. But it was interesting that you contrasted, you started off with Cat Stevens, and then you went to Richard Lloyd and television, and the Vermonters, which were real headbangers. And it's interesting, I love the theme about the Valphonics and the hearing aid. Very, very, very well done. My question for you, I guess, is when you set out writing this, who was your audience? Who were you writing for? Did you have one in mind?
No.
Oh, I'd love to know that.
Well, I think that, I think that in part it's people who have a fondness for music of the 70s and 80s. But then I think that it's other people who maybe, liked or were drawn to the music in their youth. And so, to what extent younger people read the book, I don't know. I mean, I don't know to what extent what books younger people read. I mean, well, no, that's not true. I see what they read. I don't know how this conforms, but I don't think that's, I can't really say more about that.
Please.
Yeah.
How did you two meet?
Oh, we met years and years ago. We met when we were 13 and 14.
Where?
Our parents had mutual friends. So, And John was at boarding school in Switzerland, so he'd come and stay with me in his holidays. I mean, I'm interested in who this is for because it's really, it's a sort of, it's something which you don't see that much anymore. It's a sort of Jewish comedy, isn't it? But it's also kind of dark with the wilderness thing. So it's a serious book as
Right.
well. So
I just, I just was trying to tell the story as I imagined it, and, and hope that whoever is attracted to the story will find it, or we can find them.
yeah.
And, and selling books now is so hard and so spotty that really nobody knows now how to sell. I mean, what everybody thought they knew, which was never that much, is now considerably less. So it's, but, I think they're the old-fashioned reviews and appearances in bookstores and stories. And so I've got a bunch of those coming up, so.
I never asked that question in the record business. Who will buy this record? You just assumed it would find an audience, but it was easier then because there was the New York Rocker, and The Voice, and so there were ways, and bands could play. So it's a really interesting question in publishing now. Who is this for? It's not clear.
Paul?
Yes.
John, I'm not sure if this is about the book or not, but when you learned about wilderness camps, did you have to explain that to your children?
Well, we didn't really understand it ourselves. We only found out later where they'd gone, and in most cases never found out why. And so the mystery endured, and for them as certainly it did for me. I mean, I can't speak for others. And I think, they still exist, but they've been, there were some which were really bad and have been shut down. Others, however, were less bad. This one, the one that Mark Giorgio goes to, it's not a terrible one. I mean, it's strenuous, but it's not terrible. And the whole idea of wilderness camps, I don't know, I won't deviate too much except to say that they came from an idea of psychiatry in the early 1900s when the director of an asylum realized that he got tremendous results from having the patients sleep outside when they could. And so that just in and of itself was actually as helpful, if not more helpful, than all of the therapy and intermediation. So.
Flo, you had a question.
Yeah.
Just back to your thing about who the book is for, I think what's really interesting now is that, my kids are in their late 20s, and they listen to music of, my era in sort of an equal way to every other era, and they're very interested, I think, they're interested in the paradigm that existed back then, and they want vinyl, and, I just feel like music sort of cuts through generations now, and in a funny way, that's like the sort of core of the story is musical happenings of that time. I don't know, I just feel like that's less generational than maybe we all might think.
Well, one of my kids said to me, I feel like I should have been born in the 70s. And I said, you do? You obviously don't know very much about it. Because it was, there were parts of it that were phenomenal, but there were so many other parts that were not that phenomenal. What we've culled from it is a lot better than what it was. So.
You mean you think this era at some point
Well,
will feel
I
like a
remember
golden age?
the film. Well, I mean, in your, it was a downtown
81?
Downtown 81. I mean, Jean-Michel Basquiat walking through the Lower East Side, it looked like Warsaw in 1945. I mean,
Yes.
forget how destroyed that part of the city was.
Yeah, but it was cheap. It was cheap, and so you had so much to have, people could afford to live there.
Absolutely, and that probably had something to do with CBGB's being where it was, because that was where you could live really cheaply at that time,
Yes.
right? I mean, an apartment cost 1/10 down there what it cost uptown. So,
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Yes.
So, Jonathan, I love the book. I'm about 2/3 of the way through, and I really love the skinny too. And I'm really happy to hear the comment over here about young people listening to good music. Because good music does cut through generations. And my question when I was reading this book is, well, are the references to this music going to somehow keep some people outside the story? And I actually thought, no, because the story is really so good and so interesting and so funny and so engaging in so many other ways. But if the music actually cuts through, then it's going to be even better. So I'm hoping that that's the case.
well, thanks. I hadn't worried about that yet, but now I'll start.
You know, there's something very interesting about reading music books now, because I remember when Mystery Train, Greil Marcus's book first came out, having to go to Colony Records to buy all these records that were written about in the book, you know, so that I could hear them, so that I could understand the book. And now it's all accessible immediately. So next summer I'm publishing a book by Joe Boyd that is about global music that he spent 14 years writing. And you can find everything on the internet, and we'll have massive, massive playlists. It's so, in terms of what you were talking about there, it's so different now that you have everything at your fingertips on YouTube.
Is the digital version going to have links to the music?
It's just links, yeah, that's all it is. There'll be massive playlists, one for each chapter. But it is so different now reading about music than it was then, because,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how often you went to Colony Records, or there was a place downstairs in one of the subways, I think on 42nd Street, where you bought soul records, or you had to go to Brooklyn to buy your reggae records. But you don't have to do that anymore. And I don't know if you value it as much not doing that, but
Right. Yeah, I mean, you were forced to go places.
yeah, to work at it.
To see things, hear things, whatever. I mean, you
Yeah.
couldn't just do it at home.
Yeah.
So it forced you, it roused you,
Yeah.
or something. Like, yeah. Any other question of any?
There's one.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, when will your interview in Rolling Stone be published?
When will your interview in Rolling Stone be published?
I don't think that's forthcoming. I didn't leave on very good terms, like a lot of people, and I left it amidst litigation, and a lot of litigation, and that never really got, you know, didn't get, I mean, it got settled, but not resolved. How about that? So I hope, you know, you can hope, but I'd be surprised if I'm not blackballed.
Jonathan, you remember a couple of other memorable gigs at other venues of the period?
Well, there were a lot at CBGB's.
Just a show or two that stand out in memory.
Well, I guess seeing Talking Heads for the first time, seeing television for the first time, seeing James White with Michael, the Contortions, and But sure, there are a lot of them. I mean,
We loved seeing Elliot Murphy at my father's place in Roslyn.
well, yeah,
Do you remember that?
yeah, or